Richardson. I'm privileged to serve as the Dean of the La Pinta School of Business here at Iona University, and we're thrilled tonight to have our guest and two-time alum of Iona, Al Kelly, with us. Yes?
Thank you.
And so what we're going to do tonight is a conversation. I'm not going to throw any curveballs to Al. He knows what I'm going to ask him. So we're going to have, I'm going to ask him questions he's going to answer, and then at the end we're going to open it up for your questions. And the format will be, just be thinking about your questions. We'll have microphones on either side, and we would love for you to raise your hand, and then somebody will bring you a mic. Stand up if you would, and then introduce yourself, you know, if you're a student. And we're going to give preference to students asking questions, I'll just tell you that. And maybe your class year, maybe your major, and then you can ask Mr. Kelly your question, okay?
You can all call me Al.
Well, thank you. I was not going to be presumptuous. So we'll get started. And, you know, my favorite thing when I talk to alums is to ask them, what's your Iona story? Why did you choose Iona? What was your major? And how were you involved while you were a student here?
So before we get into that question, I want to acknowledge that we're doing this session in the Dan and Kathy Henry Lounge, and Dan Henry had the office next to me for 15 years, and he died of pancreatic cancer about 9 months ago. And I actually called his wife on my way here to tell her, I didn't know we were doing it in this room, but tell her I was coming. And you know, it's just a reminder of life is short. And he was a wonderful man and a great friend, and I miss him. And he was my CFO, so he was obviously very valuable to me, so I miss him tremendously. I am the oldest of 7 children, and the first 5, I don't know how my mother did it, the first 5 of us were born within 6.5 years. And you know, it's very different than it was now. I remember talking to my dad about Thanksgiving time of my senior year of high school. I went to Iona Prep down the street, and he said, I don't know what you're thinking about for college, but you got to stay home because I can't afford to send you know, the sequence of you away. And you know, so I applied to Manhattan, Iona, St. John's, and Villanova because they waived the application fee because I was a high school runner, and Villanova had a good track team, so they waived the fee for me, which I think was like $30 or something at the time. And I ultimately decided, you know, why not, if I'm going to be going to go to school at home, I'm going to go someplace close. I had an affiliation with the Christian Brothers, having been at Iona Prep, and so that's how I got here. I had a wonderful time at Iona. I think I got a fantastic education. Early on, I was going to be able to be in the first class where you can get a degree in computer science. So I knew early on that that's what I wanted to do. But I also knew early on that I didn't want to be a programmer. I wanted to learn how to program, and I did. But I didn't want to be a programmer per se. So I worked with the dean, probably 4 or 5 deans ago, from Dr. Richardson in the business school, and the dean and School of Arts and Sciences, and I put together a plan, and I did my undergraduate degree in computer science and my graduate degree in information systems in 5 years. And I taught 3 undergraduate computer science classes during the day when I was in my 5th year, and then I did my degree in my graduate degree in the evening. So I basically did my undergraduate degree in 3.5 years and my graduate degree in a year and a half.
So rumor has it that you met your wife while you were here at Iona, and we'd love to hear a little bit about your courtship. And can you talk a little bit about her impact on your professional career?
So the rumor's not quite true.
Uh-oh.
I actually am a year ahead of my wife, and we met at her senior prom in high school when I was a freshman at Iona, and I was with a friend of hers. And I didn't know her. I had never met her before. And but she had, at that point, decided to come to Iona. Her father, my father-in-law, is an Iona graduate as well in accounting. And so I was like, you know, as soon as you get there, I'll show you around, et cetera. And 2 days before the beginning of my sophomore year, I broke my wrist very badly playing gym volleyball, which I did a couple of days a week with a bunch of knucklehead friends. And so that semester, I had a cast on my right hand and I'm righty. So I had to do the whole semester taking exams lefty and orally, so there was no time for anybody else. So I got out of the cast in December, and we went to the Iona College I took her to the Iona College basketball game against the Australian national team on December 10th of 1977. And we basically have been together since that basketball game. So we dated for 7 years, and in September of this year we'll be married 40 years, despite my youthful looks. And she too has a undergraduate degree in accounting, so she was in the business school here, and she got her MBA in finance. And interestingly enough, we both started our careers at Pepsi, which ended up having a bit of a collision course. So we realized we were running into each other and professionally, and so she ended up departing, although I then departed soon after that. We can get to that if we want. You can't have a job like mine without having like an unbelievable partner. And she ended up deciding to give up her career, and we have 5 children, and she raised our 5 children, and especially over the last 20 years, I traveled extensively, and so she was the rock that kept our family together, and there's just life's always about partnerships and collaboration, et cetera, in your personal life as well as your volunteer life, as well as the life you lead trying to make a dollar. And so she's been, I couldn't have done what I've done. I couldn't have had an ounce of the success I've had without her.
You mentioned your first job was at Pepsi. What was that job, and what did you learn while you were there in that first job?
Well, I started off, I worked at Pepsi for a couple of summers in their laboratories in Valhalla, and I didn't know all of this, bottlers around the world who bottle Pepsi send in samples each month, and they're tested for about 50 different things. How are they filled properly? Are they labeled properly? Is the chemicals within it proper, et cetera? And it was a very interesting experience. It was a union job. I was scolded numerous times for working too hard. At one point, the shop steward took me aside and said, this isn't going to be pleasant for you if you don't start slowing down, which gave me a sense of my biggest concerns about unions, even to this day, it's not about pay, it's about work rules. And that's the most bothersome thing that, I think everybody should be paid fairly, but there shouldn't be rules that define how little you can work. I just think it's not the American way, and in my opinion, that might not be popular in the Biden administration, but at least I'm not in Washington talking about this at the moment. But so I stayed, that's what I did, and I then was offered a job in financial planning, and it was great. I was from Iona. Almost everybody else was an Ivy League educated person, but because I had my undergraduate degree in computer science, I was able to get stuff done much faster than they could because I could program and they only knew how to use a calculator. And it helped me stand out. And one of my claims to fame, although this probably dates this crowd, is that I taught John Scully, who at the time was president of Pepsi, how to use an Apple computer. And John Scully then went on to succeed Steve Jobs as the CEO of Apple. And I did several jobs. The last job I did at Pepsi was I was the director of financial planning for what's Pepsi calls the fountain business, which is the poor business, like at stadiums and restaurants, et cetera, versus the bottle and cans that you buy off the shelf in supermarkets or convenience stores.
So you've had a variety of opportunities in your career. And we're going to shift gears now and talk about some of the other kind of fun things, or I think they might be fun, at least to me, that you've had the opportunity to do that were a little out of the mainstream, maybe of corporate America. In 1985, you served as head of information systems for the White House during President Reagan's second term. How did that come about? How did you get that appointment? And then what did you learn from that experience?
After President Reagan won re-election in November of 1984, two gentlemen, a guy named Don Regan and another gentleman named Jim Baker, went to the president and said, we want to stay in the cabinet, but we want to switch positions. And Baker had been the chief of staff and Regan had been the secretary of the treasury. And they convinced President Reagan to let them switch jobs, and they did. And then Don Regan was surprised how big the White House is. I actually officially worked for the Executive Office of the President. And the Executive Office of the President is, then the White House is a subset of the Executive Office of the President. And there's about 50, at least at the time, there were about 1,400 people who worked in the Executive Office of the President. So he, for the first time in the White House's history, hired a search firm. And he said, go find me some young people who are affordable. So anyway, I ended up getting a call, and I was interviewed at the Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan, and then twice at the White House itself. And then I was offered the job. And this is an example of my influence of my wife, Peggy. You know, it was a pay cut. You had to move yourself to Washington. There was no relocation help. Yep. She had to quit her job. We were married 2 years at the time. And I'm like, I'm Mr. Pragmatic. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Why are we going to do this? And she said, because you idiot, it's at the White House, and when are you going to get that opportunity? So we did it, and it was a very, very formative period for me professionally. It was also interesting for us. I mean, we lived at home until we got married. My wife grew up in Portchester. I grew up in Yonkers. And so we were, we got away by ourselves, which we didn't really have that experience kind of going away to college. And, it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And, you learn how to be a leader there. I had 70 people working for me. I had 6 when I left PepsiCo. I was 27 years old. And, you don't have like an expense account. Like if you take somebody out for a beer, you pay for the beer. It doesn't have, the HR rules are ridiculously inflexible. So, if somebody needed to make $40,000, but the government scale said they need to start at 34, you had to pay them 34. You couldn't pay them 40. And then they'd be looking at you like, wait a minute, I make 40. Why would I come here for 34? So, but that was the government, and I think it still is probably largely a lot like that. But she compelled me to go. It was a fantastic, 2.5 years or so. Our oldest son was born in Washington, and that kind of initiated me to say, my pragmatic side came back and said, now I do have to go try to make some money, because the predictions at that time were that college would cost $200,000 a year. And at that point, I had 1 child, and now with 5. And by the way, the numbers weren't off terribly. We ended up leaving Washington. And my wife worked at American University as the assistant treasurer for the time we were down there, which she greatly enjoyed.
Sure. So you started out in higher ed. She started in higher ed back then.
Well, she was at Pepsi, and then she would work for CBS. And before we went to Washington, then she quit that job and went to American. Yep. Okay.
So you mentioned how important she has been to your career, and you mentioned your 5 children. How did you balance being a dad with the expectations of your children and wanting to be there at least some? Again, you mentioned your travel and you were gone a lot, but how did that all work out? And I guess the question is, do your children know you today, and do they still like you?
I think they certainly know me, and I believe still like me. So, it's prioritization and it's focus. So I coached youth sports for over 20 years. I coached 4 of my 5 kids in basketball for at least 5 years each. And I've coached soccer which I'm not as proficient at. I've coached some baseball. So, I would try to set practices on Thursday nights so I'd get back. Sometimes it would, like in my suit running to the field, and the games were generally on the weekend, so I was able to do that. And then, we had divide and conquer things. Like I was the guy who helped with writing and arithmetic homework, and Peggy would do most other stuff. But she was the one who kind of drilled in the study habits for our kids. But I definitely had, we divide and conquer roles, and you just have to prioritize. And there's things I didn't do. Like I still to this day don't watch a lot of television. I don't read books. So I'm going to save a question if you're going to say what's your favorite leadership book. I never read a book on leadership. I don't necessarily say that proudly that I don't read a lot of books. Probably explains part of why my SATs were never very good. But you have to make sacrifices and decide what you're going to focus on and what you're not. And my kids were a high priority for me, and I made sure, at the beginning of the year, Peggy sat me down with the school calendar for. Then some years we had, I think the worst case we had was in 5 kids in 4 different schools, and like I'd know when their vacations were and when. Parent-teacher conferences, though I have to, if Peggy was sitting there, she'd be like, how many parent-teacher conferences do you get to? And the answer would be not too many. But we would have that all calendared out as well.
So when you left the White House, you went to American Express.
I did.
In 1987, and you stayed there for 23 years. Talk to us a little bit about how you kind of came in and you navigated up that structure to become president in 2007.
Well, I decided a long time ago that I wanted to be a generalist in my life, and I think that everybody's got to decide what you want to focus on. There's people who become absolute experts in something, and it's a perfectly great way to go. It's a perfectly great career. I decided to be as general as I could be. So one of the things I liked about American Express is that they allowed you to navigate and do different things. So I've worked in finance, I've worked in strategic planning, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in product development, I've worked in operations. I ran marketing research at one point. I ran our prospect and customer database. I've done jobs in technology. So I know a lot at 6 inches deep, but I'm not the type of guy who's 3 feet deep on any one subject. And so, because I wanted to be a general manager, I didn't set out to be president of anything or a CEO. I mean, it's very rare that you can get those jobs, and it's as much about timing and fortune as it is about experience and work. So that was the path I chose. But you guys each individually need to choose your own path that works for you, and you'll form that over time. I happen to have an early view. Like I wanted to major in technology because I knew it was going to be important. I'm a huge believer in, does Iona still require a speech class when you're a freshman?
Not required. No.
Not required. So when I was here, it was required. It was ridiculously formative for me as well. I mean, to be forced to step up and teach. Some of the best classes I took, my senior year of high school, I was forced to take a typing class with a real typewriter, which if you made a mistake, you had to pull the damn piece of paper out and put it back in. It was one of the greatest classes I ever took because I could type with 10 fingers. I'm not going to be the greatest stenographer in the world, but I wouldn't keep up with a courtroom. But I can type and I can speak. And communication skills are extraordinarily important, and I did a lot of work honing those. As I said to people, I like to play golf, but if you gave me the choice of telling me a topic a half hour in advance that I had to speak to 20,000 people about, or play in golf in front of a crowd, I'd pick the former every time.
Very cool. So I'm going to play fangirl for just a second. How many of you are football fans, professional football fans? Yeah, so you got a crowd of them here. So in 2011, you stepped away from the corporate world and you became president and CEO of the 2014 New York, New Jersey Super Bowl host committee to organize and launch the Super Bowl 48. So can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be, what you learned from that experience, what some of the challenges were, anything related to that?
Well, I think all your transitions in life are interesting, so I should step back. So why did I leave American Express? I left American Express because in 2006 I was told that I was the lead internal candidate to be the next CEO there, and the CEO at the time told me that he thought he would leave in 2009 or 2010. In 2009, I had lunch or dinner with him in the spring of 2009, in which he told me his plans had changed and he was going to stay indefinitely. And I decided I didn't want to wait, and I tried my hand somewhere else. And it turned out he stayed till 2018. So I was certainly glad that I did. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I left American Express on a Friday, and the following Monday, my oldest daughter, my second oldest child, was diagnosed with cancer. And that became my full-time focus, to help her get through her cancer, which thankfully she did, and she was cancer-free for a year. She relapsed, and the cancer came back, and all kinds of things. But it's all a great story because on Thursday she's being induced to have a baby, so it's very cool. So I didn't know what I was going to do, and the Super Bowl was awarded to New York for 2014. I have relationships with the two owners of the Giants, the Maras, and in fact, my daughter was having the baby. His last name is Mara. She's married into the Mara family. And the Tishes. I had business relationships with John Tish, who owned still owns the Lowe's hotels around the United States. And then I met Woody Johnson, who's still the owner of the Jets, and we had an interview. They liked me, and they asked me to become the CEO. So it was a complete startup. It was a great, different experience. There was no offices. There was no plans. There was nothing. I was the first employee. I got up to about 100 employees. And then I was the third to last to leave at the end. There were still I left 3 people behind to kind of close down the business in August of 2014. The game was in February of 2014. I had to raise $100 million to pay for the things that New York and New Jersey promised to pay for because they got the game. And I raised I wanted to do something for charity, so we set up a foundation, and we raised another $15 million for charity as part of it. I hired every single person, and made some mistakes along the way in doing so. Just startup things like you don't understand. Like one of the first people I hired, I just wrote the offer letter myself. I didn't put in that it was an at-will job, and then I tried to fire the person like 6 months later, and the lawyers are like, "Oh my God, you don't really." This person has you if they don't want to leave. And so I learned a lot about being a small business owner, and gained tremendous sympathy for small business owners. If you own a business and you think about what happened during COVID, and you need 4 cooks to run your restaurant and 2 of them don't show up. I mean, it's beyond painful. It doesn't work. Or you have 5 employees and one of them gets very ill, and you feel terrible for them, but now you're down 20% of your workforce. And so being a small business owner is very, very challenging, and that's in essence what I was. But it was a fantastic experience, and I had to navigate the hatred between Andrew Cuomo and Chris Christie, both of whom obviously have endless egos, and they never wanted to appear on stage together. So if I was having an event and I was having them there, I'd have to, cajole them to, get on the stage, and I put one on one side and one on the other. And there's a lot of rivalry between the Jets and the Giants. So actually, we were the first Super Bowl that actually was sponsored by 2 teams. And just when we did the first logo, I said, well, why don't we do it in the Giants colors and the Jets colors? And you wouldn't believe how that was analyzed to determine whether it was really 50% blue and 50% green. It was kind of stuff that drives me crazy, but again, the realities of a job like that. But the great news was there was an outdoor game. The weather was fantastic. I wore a sweater. It was a terrible game. It was Seattle against Denver, and Peyton Manning fumbled the ball on like the 3-yard line on the first drive. And the next day it snowed a foot. And I had to pull all kinds of connections with Port Authority to get the Denver Bronco planes out of Newark Airport. I called the governor, in this case Christie, because the planes were at Newark. I said, we got to get these guys out of here. And so we were able to clear a runway and get the Denver planes back on their way back to Denver. It was a great experience.
Well, like I said, I'm a fangirl, and I would love to have had that opportunity. Just so you'll know, all of you students, we're starting a new sports business minor next year. So perhaps somewhere down the line, some of our students will be working for some of these organizations.
I would just remind everybody, though, there's people who like to go to work in sports and say, but just to state the obvious, like you don't throw footballs or kick balls around as your job all day. It's a business like any other business. Like there's HR jobs, there's finance jobs, there's marketing, there's sales. I talk to a lot of young people. I want to go into sports. Well, what do you want to do? I just want to do sports. Like, well, you're not going to do sports. That's what the players do. You're going to do business. And and by the way, you're probably not going to get a job if you go in and tell somebody you're going to do sports. You got to tell them what you're going to do for them.
And my experience has been, because so many people want to do sports, whether they really want to do the sports or the job, a lot of these organizations can offer to pay a small salary and still get you in because you want to be around the teams or whatever you're doing. So
the pay stinks.
Starting pay,
all the
for
sport,
sure.
But still, you got to get very high up in the non-competition side of it. All the money is made by the players and the coaches. Yeah, the team president makes a very good dollar. The CFO might make a good dollar, but it's not like they would make in other industries, though. Yeah.
So you mentioned about how horrible the game was. Seattle ended up beating Denver 43-8. And the halftime entertainers, does anybody remember? Most of you are so young. Bruno Mars and the Red Hot Chili Peppers were halftime. So I'm sure there's a story about I'm sure there's a story about how you got them too. But
no, actually, the NFL is a dictatorship.
Oh, is it? Okay.
A total dictatorship. And a monopoly. They decide everything.
Okay. So
even the people who, like this year, it was Apple. The last number of years, it was Pepsi who sponsored the halftime show. Right. And they have no say, zero, negative say in who performs.
Interesting. So after you had that little adventure with the Super Bowl, you got tapped. You were working back here in New York, and you were a management advisor to a firm, and you got tapped to as the chairman of the Papal Visit Committee for Pope Francis's visit to New York, which included a papal tour of New York City and Mass at Madison Square Garden. That's got to be kind of really special to you as a strong Catholic, so tell us about that.
Cardinal Dolan's a very dear family friend of ours. I met him in his first month as Archbishop of New York back in 2009, and we became friends and have been close friends. I talk to him every week, sometimes multiple times a week. He's married my 2 daughters. One of my sons works for him. I went over to Rome, which was a great thrill. I went over to Rome with my wife and one of my daughters as his guest when he was made a cardinal by then Pope Benedict. Mm-hmm. And he asked me to come have a beer with him, which he does often, and I went and had a beer with him, and he told me that the Pope was coming. It wasn't that it was a secret, but that he needed help, and he asked me if I'd chair the visit, and I can't say no to him. I say yes to him too often, but I can't say no to him. So I did it. I did it for, I guess it was about 8 months. I think I had the beer with him right around Christmas of 14, and the Pope came in September of 15. And again, I built a team. But that job, I still did I was working for a private equity firm, doing a little bit of stuff. So I probably spent about 25% of my time with the private equity guys and about 75% of my time on the papal visit. But it was great. I mean, I was on the elevator with the Pope and the Cardinal and a couple of Secret Service agents at Ground Zero when we went down in the elevator to a prayer service and back up. English isn't very good, but I spent time with him. I greeted him at the stairs of St. Patrick's on Fifth Avenue when he arrived on the Thursday night. And at the end of the trip, he bestowed on my wife and I the honor of being Knights of St. Gregory, which is the highest honor a pope can give a lay person. So it was kind of a very cool thing.
That is very cool. So shifting gears back into the corporate sector now, for the last 6 years, you served as CEO and president of Visa. I guess most people in the room know that January 31st was your last day in that role, and now you've transitioned to as executive chairman. But thinking about Visa and what the role there was and what Visa does, talk to us a little bit about the digital payments industry today and looking into the future. What can we look forward to going forward?
Well, I started with Visa as a board member, as an independent board member at the end of 2013, and their CEO left and announced he was leaving in 2016, and the board asked me to become CEO, which I did for about a little more than 6.5 years, and then, as you said, on February 1st, I became executive chairman, which I'm doing on a full-time basis, but I'm not running the company each day, which takes a lot of stress off my shoulders. Payments is an incredibly evolving and great space. I've been in and around it for 3.5 decades. And, there's still about $15 trillion spent by consumers around the world in cash and check. The pandemic was an incredible catalyst for driving millions and millions of people around the world to their phone or their computer to buy. Millions and millions who never did it before that. And try as you can. You can't stuff cash or a check into this thing or your computer. So it's really been an accelerant for the digital world. And we're working to try to get in the middle. One of the things I shifted the strategy to not just be focused on payments 5 years ago to say we should be in the middle of any money movement that happens. So we power all the P2P stuff that you guys use, Venmo, Zelle, Square Cash, Apple Cash, are all powered by Visa. So beyond the scenes, when you're moving money from your bank to somebody else's bank, often it's us facilitating the actual movement. Visa's a technology company. It's a B2B technology company. We don't issue any credit cards. They're all done by banks. We have about 45% of our employees work in technology. We have 1,000 employees who just do cybersecurity. Just cybersecurity. That's it. They come to work every day. One of the biggest cybersecurity operations in the world. And we could process 65,000 transactions a second. We've never come close to that capacity. Maybe during Christmas we might hit 28 or 29,000. Last year we processed about 260 billion transactions, which works out to be just under 600 million times a day that somebody uses a Visa card around the world. And there's about, we just crossed the 4 billion mark, so there's over 4 billion Visa cards around the world. And we operate in every country but the now 6 that the U.S. has sanctions against. So we're not in Russia being the most recent. We're not in Cuba, Crimea, Syria, Iran, and North Korea. But we're in every place else, including Sudan, which just came off the U.S. sanctions list. We're in Yemen, which is a hellhole, but we're there nevertheless. We don't have offices there, but we're doing business there. We have 140 offices in 83 countries. I haven't been to all of them, but I've been to many of them.
How many have you, guesstimate, how many have you been to?
Probably 100, 105, something like that. And some of them are small.
Oh, sure.
And the last 6 we've opened up are in Africa. Mm-hmm. And I'm spending a lot of time since coming out of the pandemic in Africa. I've been in the last year to the DRC, to Nigeria, to Kenya, Egypt, South Africa. I've got a trip coming up in June to Morocco, where I'm speaking at a Bloomberg conference, and I'm going to go to Ethiopia and probably one other country still to be determined.
Do you ever tag along and tack on some vacation days to some of these maybe more interesting places to go to? Not all of them.
I mentioned I have 5 children. My older 4 are out of college. My 5th child is 10 years young, our 5th child, as most people say to me, second wife. Our 5th child is 10 years younger than our 4th child and 17 years younger than our oldest. And she's a freshman in college. She has been to, she's 19, she's been to, I think, 28 countries and only like 12 states. So she's been, during the summer months and holidays, she's been a traveling companion of mine, as has my wife. I took my daughter went on a trip with me to Ukraine about 3 years ago. And after the invasion last February 24th, I made the decision 4 days later that we were going to shut down our business in Russia, but I waited 4 more days because I needed to get our top people in Russia out of the country so that Putin's thugs wouldn't pick them up and arrest them. And then the following week, I went to Budapest, Warsaw, to meet our Ukrainian employees who had left. And my daughter asked me if she could go with me, and my wife, Peggy, was like, "You're not taking her there." But she talked her mother into it. And so she came with me, and we loaded our plane up with tons of clothes and toys, et cetera. And she was in charge of setting those all up and working with the kids and mothers because men couldn't leave Ukraine. Only the women could. And then she went on with me to Dubai, where about 200 of our Russian employees had migrated because they were so frustrated and angry at Putin that they wanted out. And we offered everybody in Russia the chance at our expense to completely relocate your family anywhere you want in the world. And believe it or not, 80% of the people took us up on it. And think about that. They left behind their homes.
Yep.
In some cases, they left behind other family members. But it's a sign of that, the educated Russian, unfortunately, most of them are not. Unfortunately, all the news in Russia is all BS. It's really fake news there. Like we talk about fake news here, it's really fake news there. It's a complete fabrication of the truth. But the educated people know it. But the ones that aren't, think this guy's a rock star. And he's probably the scariest man on the face of the earth right now.
So we have a lot of students in our room, obviously, and some of them are going to be leaving us in about 3 months, and some of them a little bit longer will be with us. But what advice would you have them, give them as they think about preparing to enter the workplace? What should they be doing now to prepare for that?
Well, I think in a perfect world, you really start your preparation kind of early on in college, and deciding what you're going to major in, what you're going to do over the summers. Generally the summer between junior year and senior year is an important summer to try to get a job that's relevant to what you want to do, or a job that actually could turn into a job offer. That's like a really important thing to try to focus on. That said, making sure you have a good resume. My 4 older kids are all in the workforce, and I help their friends and families, and I butcher resumes. If I tell people, if you're going to give me your resume, you got to take the feedback. I just think a lot of people just don't know how to do a good job on resumes. So having a good resume, deciding what you want to do. Like, you're the CEO of your life. Every single one of you. You got to do what you like to do. You got to know what you want to do. And that can't be what your parents want to do. It can't be what your boyfriend or girlfriend wants to do or your partner wants to do. Like, you got to decide what gives you passion. And if you can live a life where work is also a passion, look, all of us would love to win the lottery, but you'd get bored if you did nothing. So you ideally want to like what you're doing. I mean, I have friends my age who hate what they're doing, but they're making, a certain amount of money, and if they change, they would make less money and they can't afford to do it. Like, that's not where you want to try to find yourself. But I teach a leadership class that I call the 10 C's of leadership to lots and lots of people at Visa. I did it at Amex. And, I'm very big on curiosity. Like, be curious. Like, always be a lifelong learner. I learn stuff every day from my kids, from their friends, from the young people who work for me at Visa. Like, curiosity is critically important. Communications is critically important. I can tell in the first 30 seconds of an interview whether the person is a no or a maybe. I can't tell. I'm not smart enough in the first 30 seconds to say I should hire them. So I can't say yes in 30 seconds. But I can say no in 30 seconds. And what would no feel like is somebody who comes in and, like this, and, how was your weekend? Fine. How did you find getting into the office? Man, it was fine. Like, at that point, I'm done. Like, if you can't get up for an interview, I'm going to have to call an ambulance by the third day you're working for us, because you're going to be completely out of energy. So, I'm a big believer in energy. Like, bring energy, bring passion, show people that you care. You have much better chance of getting a job and getting promoted and everything else if you work hard, you're curious, and you bring energy to the job every single day. Now, there's other aspects to it as well, but if you focused on those, work as hard as you can, bring energy, and be curious, that's a damn good start to being successful.
Totally agree. So is there anything else that we want to talk about before we open up to Q&A?
No, let's get to what you guys want to talk about.
Okay, so let me get my.
Can people outside the room ask questions?
Well, we talked about that, but we thought we would give the priorities to the people in the room,
Okay,
because
cool.
they got here early enough
your
to
guys' show.
get one of these. So, okay. I'm not sure where the microphone's going. Oh, so Chris, you got your hand up? Keep passing. Yes. Stand up. Tell us who you are. Major. Oh, it's not working.
Hello?
Well, they won't be able to hear outside, so that means we'll need to repeat the question.
Chris, here we go.
Here you go.
I'm good.
Okay.
It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we have people in the control room who are controlling this.
Okay.
So, okay. Chris.
My name is Chris Wiggin. I'm a junior finance major. Coming from Iona, how do you feel, like, what do you think are the attributes people have, like, going into the C-suite and be able to be successful coming from Iona?
Well, I'm very proud of Iona. I learned a lot here, and I think a lot of people who come here are scrappy. You're sitting, the woman to your left is, a fantastic example of somebody who, took advantage of the education here and went on to do lots of great things. You can get a great education almost anywhere if you apply yourself. And, I've competed against the people who went to Harvard and all the other Ivy League schools, and, many of them are, very theoretical. They don't necessarily have good street skills. They're not necessarily very pragmatic. There's a whole bunch of things that go into being successful. It isn't just IQ. In fact, EQ, emotional quotient, is as important as EQ to get ahead and be a leader. And I've already mentioned, like, a speech class, the classes I took here in mathematics, the classes that I took in the business school. I learned an awful lot here, and very proud of the education I got. And it actually grinds at me when people think, because I've had people say, oh, you went to Iona. By the way, Steve Squeri, who's the CEO of American Express, went to Manhattan. And if you actually look at the Fortune 500, you'd be surprised how many people went to schools that are not Ivy League schools because because of all these other attributes that you have to be scrappy, be pragmatic, be hardworking, have a good EQ. Those things aren't necessarily, well, they're not taught at the Ivy League schools. And so you should use Iona as an excuse for success. And there's no reason why everybody here, can't be successful. John Nalen, who's the head of Fox, is an Iona graduate. It's just another example. So, he's the guy he negotiates the contracts with the NFL and deals with crazy Rupert Murdoch and all those kinds of things.
So we have a John Manley in this building. It's not the same John Manley. Dr. Manley in the finance department.
No, this is Nalen, N-A-L-L-E-N, John Nalen.
I thought you said Manley.
I'm sorry,
yeah, okay.
Nalen, N-A-L-L-E-N.
Okay, sorry about that. Who else has a question? Right here?
We need the microphone so people outside can hear.
Mia, you want to ask? You got one? Well, go ahead, Mia, since you've got the...
Hi, my name is Mia Tovar. I'm a marketing major here at Iona Senior. First of all, I wanted to thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You mentioned your extensive traveling for business, and I just wanted to know how traveling internationally has shaped your perspective on managing different work cultures.
It's a great question. It really is a great question. Even countries that are right next to each other can be wildly different based on history, government, regulation, tradition, religion, name it, all these factors. The reality is that I believe most businesses, definitely my business, is a very local business. We try to have a global strategy, but we try to manage the business on a very local basis. So when I go to a country, I tell the president of that country, or we call them the country manager, I am here to work for you. So tell me what I can do for you for the next 2 days. And so that's what my philosophy is. I go in and work for them. And we try to put local people as the head of countries wherever we can. Once in a while, for development reasons, we might move somebody who's from one country to another just to get them experience. But we try as much as we can to try to have somebody who has the passport of that country running that country. So I'm very attuned to it. In fact, I think it's an element of diversity that we don't talk a lot about. We tend to talk about diversity in terms of gender and skin color. And by the way, both are extraordinarily important to talk about. But it's equally important to talk about the fact that people from different countries have an appreciation for that country that's much greater than I would as an American. So for me to go into a country and have some kind of attitude, I'm some kind of big badass American and I know what to do. In Malaysia or in Chile, I'm a guest and I'm a visitor and and I try to be an enabler, but I take all my cues from the local people and I try to get briefed before I go about habits and for instance, a man crossing his legs in certain countries is not looked upon well, and in countries where, like I was just in Japan 2 weeks ago, most of the visit, the Japanese don't speak much English. They understand it though. That's one thing you have to realize is that you go to a lot of countries and you'll have an interpreter, but they'll often understand you. They're just uncomfortable speaking it. So you have to be very conscious of that. But it's not unusual in China, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, countries like that, where there'll be much more formal chairs than this, and I'll be sitting here, and Dr. Richardson sitting here, and there's an interpreter behind me, or I've got it in my ear. And all of those are the kinds of things you get an appreciation for how diverse the world is. Thanks, Mia.
Oh, over here. Oh, sorry.
Hi, so my name's Angelo Galtageroni. I'm a junior finance major. I appreciate your time for coming out. But my question to you, sir, was with such great experience and success, how did you keep up the humility? And I can hear that you had a great atmosphere of people around you throughout your time, but what was the mindset to keep up such drive and dedication to keep going after, like I had mentioned, such success?
I try to be empathetic to everybody's condition. I'm just another human being. I get dressed in the morning, and I can't cause more hours to appear in a day or a week. And you can decide to be a good person, or you can decide to be an asshole. And I have chosen to be a good person. And unfortunately, that's not the way everybody is. And there's people. I totally believe in servant leadership. That my job is to get people to respect me. Their job is to not to respect me because of my title. That's not their job. My job is to earn their respect. And one of the ways you do that is by treating people with decency and treating people with empathy and treating them as you would expect to be treated. So I get a lot of, I appreciate you saying it, I get a lot of that feedback. I've gotten a lot of it the last, since November when I announced that I was going to give up the CEO job. I've gotten, literally thousands of emails from employees who appreciate that's what I did, and I appreciate getting the notes from them. But that's, that wasn't hard for me. It was just what I did. It was just the way I am. It's just who I am. It was just the genuine me. And that's, by the way, one of the things that I think leaders should strive for is to be authentic. I think authenticity is one of the greatest labels a leader can get.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Lee. I'm a business major. My question for you is that you've had so many jobs between the White House, Pepsi, Visa. How do you decide to make all these career choices, like whether you decide to stay at a company or leave a company?
Well, the interesting thing is that I would dispute your premise, but that's not your fault. It's probably that we didn't have enough time to go through it. But so I actually would view myself as largely a loyalist. I spent 4 years at American Express. At Pepsi. I would have stayed, but the White House offer came along. Then I left the White House because I wanted to go make some money, and then I stayed at American Express for 23 years. And I've been associated with Visa for the last 10 years. It was really that period when I left American Express because I wasn't going to become president in April of 2010 till I did the Super Bowl in the beginning of 2011, and that had an end to it, right? So I actually view myself as much more of a loyalist than a job jumper. And I think that too many people jump jobs. I have to tell you, I know it's other people, I'm going to admit a bias, that if I get a resume and somebody's worked at 6 places in 10 years, they're going to have to work really hard at getting me to convince them I should hire them, really hard. And sometimes there's circumstances, I get it. But a common technique of mine in interviewing is I ask people to talk me through their transitions. I want to understand in depth each of your transitions. And if they can compel me that the transitions all made good sense, then they perhaps win me over in that particular case. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Shailen. Oh yeah, we learn best practices all over the world and adopt them. There's things we've learned in small little markets where we might have 5 or 6 people that they're doing that we're not doing someplace else. They've come up with a product concept that we haven't come up with somewhere else. So we have a pretty good infrastructure for sharing. We use Salesforce as our enterprise system that allows us to share. Like anybody can get on Salesforce and look at what's happening in different countries or with different clients, et cetera. And we're pretty good about that. Like when I go see somebody, I get a briefing. I used to get like a 4-page briefing, and I said to people, a brief is brief. 4 pages is not brief, so they're now 1 page. But one of the things that's on it is what's been my experience with the person. Have I met them before? If I've met them before, when did I meet them? Like where, what country, what event, and what date, so that I can refer back to it and say, oh, it's great to see you again. I last saw you in Brussels in 2017. Yes, there's, visas, like 47% of our revenue is in the United States, 53% is outside the United States. And if we do our job, or if my successors do their job right, we should be heading towards 60-40, where 60% of our revenue comes from outside the United States. Sir?
It's not on. Hang on a minute. Perfect.
There we go. Hi, my name is Agri Jr. I am a sophomore. It's my second year. I'm speech and communications major, mostly focusing on autodidactic acquisition of various foreign languages. But my question was, I know you speak a lot about your sacrifices, decisions, the things that you had to do, from the smallest things, not reading books, to not watching TV, to moving to
I hope
Washington.
that's not the headline of the end of this thing.
It's not.
It doesn't read.
That wasn't my biggest takeaway. But yes, the moving to Washington, within situations like those where you have to make big decisions or there's opportunities that come, how often is it, or have you ever experienced that there's a situation or a decision or an opportunity that threatens the integrity of your character? In other words, you really have to think about why you're doing this before you make this big decision. And I know it might seem like an obvious question. Obviously, when you make a big decision, you think about something like that. But how frequent is it that you have to actually step back and think about, why did I start this? Why am I doing this? Before you actually make the decision, the yes or the no?
Well, I'm going to say a couple of things in reaction to it. One is decision-making is underrated big time. And I talk to leaders about it all the time, that too many leaders want all the facts before they make a decision. And the reality is there's no such thing. So one of the things that's a common thing I've written for 30 years, 40 years on performance appraisals is apply the 98% rule more often. You've got 80% of the data. You're not going to get the last 2%. It's too expensive. It's not going to make a difference anyway. So at this point in time, make a darn decision. So the first thing I'd say is that too many leaders are too reticent to make a decision, and making decisions critical for the enterprise to continue to move on. Look, in this world with all these conversations about woke and wokeness and all that stuff, I have found myself in the middle of a lot of situations where people want me to speak out, and I personally have a very strong point of view that leaders of corporations should only speak out when the issue is, speak out publicly. That doesn't mean not speak to your employees, but speak out publicly only when the issue applies and is completely relevant to your company. So when George Floyd was murdered, I spoke out publicly about it. And we did something very different than any other company. Everybody wrote a check to, organizations that focus on black people. And I said, I don't want to do that. And so I made a $10 million commitment to something called the Visa Black Scholars and Jobs Program. And we now have over 200 freshmen and sophomores attending 37 universities around the United States who we're mentoring and keeping track of. And if they graduate and do their part, they'll get a guaranteed job at Visa at the end of their 4 years. But I don't think it's my position to speak out on abortion. I don't think it's my position to speak out on guns. Because part of it is our mission, literally our purpose as a company, is to uplift everyone, everywhere. And so why would I go and try to antagonize people by taking issues on a position on divisive issues that has absolutely nothing to do with the business of Visa? By the way, even if I wanted to, or even if I had a personal view of it, I think something CEOs have to do, and I think many do, not all of them do, is you've got to have the maturity to put your views and your feelings aside from time to time, and do what's right for the company. And that there's been a lot in the last 3 years because of that I've agonized over. This whole return to work, trying to get people back to the office has been a total bear for us. And, you know, it's kind of crazy if 3 years ago I said, by the way, we're just going to come to the office 4 days a week, they would have built a statue of me. You know, now I want people to come back 50% of the time, which is, you know, 2 days a week, 2 weeks a month, 3 days a week, 2 weeks a month. And like, I'm inflexible. Somebody just wrote in one of our surveys that it's so old-fashioned to come to the office. Old-fashioned. We all came to the office 5 days a week 3 years ago. That doesn't qualify as old-fashioned. So there's things that, you know, along those lines that are just tough to navigate. And, you know, I try to make sure I don't have a bias of an old guy and who's, you know, I try to be sympathetic to the current situation. But I truly, by the way, believe people ought to be in the office for a fair amount of time. You know, I think the 5 day a week thing that ship has sailed. But if you were given the choice of working remotely or going in the office, go in the office. Go in the office. It's the best way to learn and meet people, et cetera. And don't be ashamed of it, because you'll have friends who will be like, that's crazy, work remotely, it's so easy, I can do work in my pajamas and all that. And all that's true, I get it, but my personal belief is you can do a job at home, you can't build a career at home. So if you want to build a career, you go to the office.
Okay.
You seem
Another question
you seem
in the back?
unsatisfied with my answer.
No.
Okay, all right.
In the back?
Hi.
Hi, yeah, I'm Finnegan. I'm in my
Turn it
third
on.
year.
Finnegan, your first name or your last name?
Finnegan's my first name, Finnegan Davis. I'm in my third year here studying finance, and my question to you is, either now or earlier in your career, what's kept you up at night, and how have you dealt with those stresses?
What keeps me up at night is what I am not thinking about. So, you know, as the CEO, there's many, many things that are on the table, and many issues back to the problems and decision things, many things that are brought to me. I worry about what I'm missing. What am I not thinking about that I should be thinking about? What am I not looking around the corner? And I think that's a really important thing to do. I was super frustrated my first 6 months as the CEO of Visa, because I felt like every day I was dealing with too many transactional things. So I started a concept where I put a day and a half to 2 days on my calendar every month that were called CEO days. And I used them for just strategic topics. And it wasn't a standing committee. I would decide about 10 days before what topics I want to cover. I would have, you know, I have a chief of staff who would keep track of a list for me. And then I'd invite to participate the people who were most relevant to the issue, regardless of whether they reported to me or they were 4 levels down in the organization. And it was a game changer for me, because I had this time every month to actually lock myself away for a day and a half or 2 days and think 6 months and to 6 years out, and not be stuck with what happened in, Finland today and what happened in Brazil tomorrow. You can get really caught up in the issues of the day, especially in a global company. So, did that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir. Yep.
Good evening, sir. My name is Paul Hernandez.
Hi, Paul.
Business major. One of my questions, I know you mentioned leadership a lot, which is crucial. I mean, of course, being in your position. But with that being said, you also mentioned that now you're giving classes like leadership, guidance, and all that. So coming up, like, did you have a mentor that you look up to? And if so, what type of impact did it have on you? Maybe somebody that you can...
I had several. I'd start with my father, who, taught me the importance of everything from a good, solid handshake, look people in the eye, call them by name, like he wouldn't tolerate anything less. Like, no, shake the hand again, or look them in the eye again, which, by the way, in many cases are lost skills. Like, again, if you want to make an impression on people, you go up to them and say, Al Kelly, nice to meet you, and a good, firm handshake. Going like, hi, what's your name? it's very different. Like, it's about showing confidence. It's about showing that you've got your act together. And so my dad was a lector in church and taught me the importance of, communication skills. And I did some of that myself, even in grammar school, would, do readings at Mass. There was a gentleman when I first started at PepsiCo, who I'm sure is deceased at this point, who, used to take me aside, and I thought he was ancient. I hate to say he was probably like 55, and he used to beat me up. He said, look, fancy, dancy MBA guy like this. Stop using these big words and be practical. And he was fantastic because he just kicked my ass. He didn't care. He wanted me to do well, and he took me under his wing. I learned to travel on business with him. Like that's a whole other thing. Like, what do you do on traveling on business? Like, what's okay and what's not okay? And there's a lot of things that are not okay. There's any number of times where I've left a work event because it was like it wasn't going in the right place. I've had a woman pinch me in the ass or something. I'm out of here. That's the end of the evening. And there's it's not smart to have more than a drink at a business event. It's not smart to get too comfortable with people too early. Emails scare the living daylights out of me in your guys' generation, because people talk in shorthand. And I don't think you should do that until you've established a relationship with somebody. You shouldn't use, I know it's more efficient to use the letter U for YOU. Type out YOU. We're not on that U relationship level yet. So I think you should think about email as more formal communication than you think about it, especially in a business setting. You got to separate how you talk to your friends versus how you would email when you're in business. What did you ask me?
Mentors.
Oh, mentors. Yeah, along the way, as I moved up, it was more a matter of, I learned from everybody. Like, I learned from my kids, I learned from some of their friends. I mean, everybody can bring something to the table. I've learned interesting techniques from watching other people. And one of the things I would say to all of you, when you start your career, you should look at every single opportunity to be in a meeting as a learning lab. Your first priority in that meeting should be to contribute in whatever way you're supposed to contribute in that meeting, but you should use it as a learning lab. Watch how the meeting's conducted. Watch how the person doing the meeting, brings order to the meeting, takes care, how do they deal with somebody who doesn't speak up? How do they deal with somebody who's talking too much? How do they deal with somebody who's distracting the group and bringing them off topic? How do you deal with the person who's repeating the same thing 6 times? Or, by the way, how do you not deal with it, right? You can learn as much from observing what people don't do well as you can from watching them do well. And when I said I haven't done a lot of reading, I am a master at observing people in situations. And a lot of times, by the way, I'll wake up in the morning, have to give a speech in the afternoon, and I haven't written a word down. But that day, I'll watch the news. Well, I watch the news every day, but I'll either watch the news or reading the Journal, the Times, or something. Something strikes me from that day that becomes kind of a theme that I'll use in what I'll talk about, because it'll be very, very current. And somebody, I observed somebody doing that, and I thought it was kind of a neat thing. So I've learned so much from so many people, and you can learn from people way down in the organization, not just up in the organization.
Okay, we have about time for one more question, right here, right next door.
Alex Lim, Information Systems. Thank you for taking the time to come out and doing
My pleasure.
this. Right? My question is, you talked a little bit about resumes and how people make mistakes. What is one common mistake that we should look out for, when we go out to apply for jobs or in the interview process?
So let me start with a caveat that I think coming out of college, it's a little bit more challenging to write a resume, right? You just haven't had the right experiences. So, and some of this is a matter of opinion. I'm sure a few things I'm about to say, people in the Career Center might say, the guy's crazy. I don't think a resume from somebody coming out of college should have an objective on it. Your objective is to get a damn job. Let's be honest. Anything else, bullshit. You want to get a job and you want to get a paycheck. So writing an objective is, in my opinion, a waste of time. And but remember, life is not, often it's binary, right? Like you can say, well, what harm is it? Well, if the objective's not written well or you come off as a goofus, then you're far better off not having the objective. But I just don't think you need it. I think so that's, I think, a mistake. I think a second mistake is not leading with action verbs and actually talking about where you've had impact. Now, again, a little bit more difficult when you haven't had a lot of experience. But I see it for people who've worked 40 years, and they list out accomplishments or like their job. It's almost like a job description as opposed to like, what the hell did you get done? Like, what impact did you have? Like, I helped sign. Like, even if you worked in a store, like I helped drive an extra $100 a week of sales. Like, that's impact. And so people don't put impact down on the resume. You don't need to, it's not a list of what you did. Who cares? You should look at your resume and come away and say, I did the best I could showing the impact I had in the jobs I had. The third thing is, be a little liberal on your outside interest and activities, because you'd be surprised what that might trigger, right? Somebody, you might decide, I'm not going to say I was in the chess club. Well, the person interviewing you might have been in the chess club, and all of a sudden, it makes a connection. So again, you don't want to go back to like what you did. Like, you don't want to say I was in the chess club when you were 4, but the point is, don't be afraid to, especially at your guy's stage. Like, that's not what I would advise for people my age to do, but don't be afraid to say the different things you've worked on, because something might trigger a connection that could make a difference. Where somebody says, "This is what I did. I'm going to give this young person, an extra hard look because, they're into something I'm into." So those are, and then. Obviously, I didn't talk about, I can't tell you how many resumes I read with misspellings and bad English and things like that. I'm going to leave those out, but you gotta have somebody proofread it, because that's death. I worry about people. When I get a resume and it's got like 5 misspellings, how many people have you sent this to? When they say like 50, I'm like, oh my God, because that's just going to be. You're going to be very unfortunately not going to get interviewed. That's the case.
So I'm going to use that as a time to do a commercial for our Career Center here on campus, as well as Cal Byrne in the business school, to help you with your resumes, because we don't want to have you apply to Visa or anywhere else with 5 misspellings or 1 misspelling, or poor formatting, or not showing your impact or whatever. So please take advantage of those opportunities, because they are for you. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to help you. Al, thank you so much. This has been awesome. We could give you lots of things, but it was raining today, so you're going to get a Penta School of Business umbrella today from Iona. So thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Appreciate it. And good luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.